Welcome to Conspiracy Files. I'm your host, Zoe Parker, and in today's episode, we're uncovering a theory that stretches back to the roots of human consciousness itself. It's called the Stoned Ape Theory, an idea that claims psychedelic mushrooms may have jump-started our evolution. Was it a divine accident of nature or something more deliberate? A forgotten truth buried in our ancestral past? Or a speculative myth passed off as science? The answers may lie deeper than we think. In the long arc of human evolution, one question continues to haunt researchers, anthropologists, and philosophers alike. What sparked the sudden leap in human cognition, creativity, and self-awareness? For millions of years, early hominids like Australopithecus and Homo habilis displayed only marginal evolutionary shifts. Tool use remained rudimentary, social structures were basic, and language, if it existed at all, was limited to crude vocalizations. But somewhere between 2 million and 100,000 years ago, a dramatic transformation took place. Brain size nearly tripled, language emerged, and art, culture, and complex social systems began to take form. This evolutionary explosion, often referred to as the Great Leap Forward, remains one of science's greatest mysteries. Traditional evolutionary models suggest that environmental pressures and the development of hunting techniques were primary catalysts for this shift. Climate change led to vast expansions of African grasslands, pushing early hominids out of dense forests and into open savannas. With this environmental change came new survival strategies: bipedal locomotion to cover large distances, cooperative hunting, and eventually the development of tools. Natural selection favored those with enhanced problem-solving skills and social cooperation. Over generations, these pressures shaped our ancestors into something more sophisticated, more adaptable. But for some researchers and fringe theorists, these explanations fall short. They point to the relative speed of the transformation. A jump of such magnitude in such a relatively short period seems to defy the slow, grinding mechanics of Darwinian evolution. How could the human brain evolve so rapidly, and why did it happen when it did? It was against this backdrop of evolutionary curiosity that ethnobotanist Terence McKenna proposed an idea both radical and ancient in tone. Drawing from his deep study of psychedelics and shamanic traditions around the world, McKenna hypothesized that a symbiotic relationship with psychoactive fungi, particularly Psilocybe cubensis, commonly known as magic mushrooms, might have been the missing link in human evolution. According to McKenna, early hominids living in Africa's shifting grasslands would have inevitably come across these mushrooms growing in the dung of large grazing animals. Their ingestion, he suggested, didn't just produce hallucinations, it altered the very trajectory of human consciousness. While McKenna introduced the theory to the public in the 1990s, the cultural soil for such an idea had already been tilled. The 1960s and 70s saw a widespread fascination with altered states of consciousness, psychedelics, and Eastern mysticism. Influenced by authors like Aldous Huxley and anthropologists like Carlos Castaneda, a generation began questioning the rigid boundaries of Western science and exploring alternative narratives of human history. McKenna's theory arrived as both a product of that era and a challenge to scientific orthodoxy. Yet, beyond cultural trends, there are anthropological traces that made McKenna's idea resonate. Archaeological evidence from Upper Paleolithic cave sites in Europe and Africa includes enigmatic paintings and carvings, some of which resemble mushroom-like figures. Other sites show clear signs of ritualistic behavior, suggesting that altered states of consciousness may have played a central role in early religious or spiritual activity. Even the earliest mythologies and oral traditions from tribal societies point to transformative visions, spirit journeys, and the consumption of sacred plants. Whether or not psychedelics catalyzed our mental evolution, there is little doubt that they have played a role in shaping human perception and spiritual practice for thousands of years. The use of entheogens, substances used in religious or shamanic contexts, is documented across countless indigenous cultures, from Amazonian ayahuasca ceremonies to Siberian reindeer shamans who consumed the hallucinogenic Amanita muscaria mushroom. Against this backdrop of human curiosity, spiritual seeking, and evolutionary mystery, the Stoned Ape Theory emerged. not as an established scientific consensus, but as a provocative hypothesis that dared to ask, what if the path to modern human intelligence didn't come from fire or flint, but from fungus? At the center of the Stoned Ape Theory is Terence McKenna, a figure as enigmatic as the theory itself. A philosopher, ethnobotanist, and psychonaut, McKenna spent decades studying indigenous rituals, psychedelic plants, and the boundaries of human consciousness. His journeys through the Amazon in the 1970s, alongside his brother Dennis, exposed him to powerful psychoactive substances like ayahuasca and psilocybin mushrooms, experiences that would form the bedrock of his radical ideas about evolution and human history. McKenna's academic background, though unconventional, gave weight to his work. He studied ecology and conservation at the University of California, Berkeley, a place known at the time for intellectual radicalism, and later immersed himself in anthropology, shamanism, and the role of hallucinogens in early spiritual traditions. He was not a trained evolutionary biologist, but his interdisciplinary approach and charismatic delivery helped him gain a wide following. His most notable works, including Food of the Gods and The Archaic Revival, positioned him as a voice for those questioning mainstream science and exploring consciousness through psychedelic experiences. In Food of the Gods, McKenna laid out the foundations of the Stoned Ape Theory. He proposed that approximately 2 million years ago, a group of early hominids began experimenting with psilocybin mushrooms. These fungi, he argued, offered numerous evolutionary advantages. At low doses, psilocybin enhanced visual acuity, potentially improving hunting and foraging success. At moderate doses, it encouraged social bonding and promoted the formation of proto-language through ecstatic vocalizations. And at higher doses, it may have catalyzed religious or spiritual experiences that bonded early human groups through shared vision and myth-making. McKenna wasn't the only figure exploring these connections. His ideas found kinship with thinkers like Aldous Huxley, whose novel Island described a utopian society centered around the ritual use of psychedelic substances. The anthropologist Michael Harner also documented the widespread use of hallucinogens in shamanic practices across continents, reinforcing the idea that altered states of consciousness have long been embedded in human culture. Despite the compelling narrative, McKenna's theory remained mostly within the realm of speculative thought. However, it did catch the attention of some scientists, psychologists, and researchers interested in the evolutionary impact of psychoactive substances. Roland Griffiths, a prominent researcher at Johns Hopkins University, began conducting rigorous studies on psilocybin in controlled environments, finding that high-dose experiences often led to long-lasting shifts in perception, behavior, and even personality traits. While his work didn't address evolution directly, it reignited academic interest in the potential cognitive effects of psychedelics. Some archaeologists and ethnobotanists began revisiting ancient sites with a new lens. In places like Tassili Ager in Algeria, rock art dating back thousands of years depicts humanoid figures with mushrooms sprouting from their heads or held in their hands. These images, while open to interpretation, have been cited by supporters of the theory as visual proof of early psychedelic use. In Mesoamerica, mushroom-shaped stones dating back to 1000 BCE have also been discovered, associated with rituals that involved the consumption of hallucinogenic fungi. While McKenna's theory remains controversial, it tapped into a broader fascination with the origins of human consciousness. By linking our cognitive leap to something as humble and naturally occurring as a mushroom, he offered a narrative that combined biology, spirituality, and the environment in a single transformative moment. For many, the idea wasn't just about evolution. It was about reclaiming a forgotten intimacy with the natural world, one in which our very minds may have been shaped by what we chose to eat from the forest floor. Central to the Stoned Ape Theory are the physiological and psychological effects of psilocybin mushrooms, and how these effects could have translated into evolutionary advantages for early hominids. Psilocybin, the active compound in many psychedelic mushrooms, is a serotonergic psychedelic. Once ingested, it is converted in the human body into psilocin, which binds to serotonin receptors in the brain, particularly the 5-HT2A receptor. The result is an altered state of consciousness characterized by enhanced sensory perception, intensified emotional experiences, and altered patterns of thought. Proponents of the theory argue that these effects, particularly enhanced vision and perception, would have offered early humans significant survival benefits. In a hunting and gathering context, sharper visual acuity could have meant the difference between spotting a predator in the brush or missing the glint of sunlight on water. McKenna speculated that low doses of psilocybin acted as a kind of cognitive enhancer, a naturally occurring nootropic that improved the brain's capacity to process information from the environment. At moderate doses, psilocybin's effects shift from sensory enhancement to social and emotional amplification. Users often report heightened empathy, a sense of unity with others, and spontaneous verbalizations. McKenna suggested that this could have encouraged the development of early language. In his view, the ecstatic vocalizations and repetitive chanting induced by the mushrooms may have laid the foundation for symbolic communication. In groups that regularly consumed psilocybin, these vocal patterns could have become ritualized, eventually evolving into structured language, a cornerstone of complex human society. At higher doses, psilocybin produces profound spiritual or mystical experiences. Users describe encounters with disembodied entities, visions of geometric patterns, and the dissolution of the ego. To McKenna, these experiences weren't just hallucinations, they were formative. He proposed that such encounters could have given rise to early religious ideas and mythologies. Shared visionary experiences during group ceremonies might have fostered tribal cohesion, belief systems, and a sense of sacred purpose. In an evolutionary context, these social bonds could have increased group survival and reproductive success. Another key claim in support of the theory lies in psilocybin's ability to stimulate neurogenesis, the growth of new neurons. Some modern studies, though limited, have shown that psilocybin and related compounds may promote the growth of dendritic spines, the tiny protrusions on neurons that facilitate communication between brain cells. If early hominids consumed these compounds regularly, McKenna theorized, they may have gradually reshaped the brain's architecture, contributing to increased intelligence, creativity, and adaptability over generations. The theory also draws on ecological and behavioral observations. Psilocybin mushrooms commonly grow in the dung of large herbivores like antelope, buffalo, and cattle. Early hominids who followed these animals for hunting or scavenging would have inevitably come across the mushrooms. The idea of a natural coevolution, where fungi, humans, and animals all interact within a shared ecological system, adds another layer of plausibility to the narrative. Ritual use of psychoactive substances among modern indigenous tribes provides further indirect evidence. Across the globe, from the Amazon to Central Africa, shamanic cultures have long used hallucinogenic plants as tools for healing, divination, and communion with the spirit world. These practices, often passed down through oral tradition, suggest a deep-rooted relationship between altered states and the human psyche. If such practices are remnants of a much older evolutionary strategy, as McKenna suggested, then the seeds of modern consciousness may indeed have been planted by something as simple and as mysterious as a mushroom. Evaluating the claims of the Stoned Ape Theory requires a closer look at the actual evidence presented and how it aligns or conflicts with known scientific data. One of the most significant challenges lies in the difficulty of proving psychoactive mushroom use in prehistoric times. Psilocybin mushrooms, like most organic materials, do not fossilize. They decompose rapidly and leave little trace, making direct archaeological confirmation nearly impossible. No preserved remnants of psychedelic fungi have ever been recovered from early hominid sites. Instead, the theory relies heavily on indirect forms of evidence: rock art, cultural patterns, and comparative anthropology. Among the most frequently cited pieces of visual evidence are the mushroom-like figures found in cave art from various regions. At Tassili N'Ajjer in the Sahara Desert, ancient petroglyphs depict humanoid beings with mushroom-shaped objects in their hands and sprouting from their bodies. Dated to over 7,000 years ago, these images have been interpreted by some researchers as early depictions of psychedelic rituals. However, interpretations vary. While proponents see these as clear signs of entheogenic practice, skeptics argue they may represent plants, headdresses, or symbolic imagery unrelated to mushroom use. In Mesoamerica, the discovery of mushroom stones, carved figures with mushroom-shaped caps, has been used to suggest ceremonial use dating back more than 2,000 years. These artifacts, especially prevalent in Guatemala and southern Mexico, often appear in religious contexts. Some are associated with deities or funerary practices, indicating that mushrooms may have held spiritual significance. Still, these artifacts postdate the period in which McKenna's theory is focused. They offer valuable insight into ancient traditions, but do not directly support the role of mushrooms in early hominid evolution. Another piece of evidence often discussed is the physiological impact of psilocybin on brain function. Modern neuroscience has demonstrated that psychedelics like psilocybin increase connectivity between previously disconnected regions of the brain. Functional MRI scans show that under the influence of psilocybin, brain activity becomes less hierarchical and more globally integrated. This can result in enhanced creativity, novel problem solving, and the breakdown of conventional thought patterns. In theory, these neurological shifts could have provided an adaptive edge in a complex and rapidly changing environment. Studies have also indicated that psychedelics can promote neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to reorganize itself by forming new neural connections. In animal models, psilocybin has been shown to increase the growth of dendritic spines and synaptic density. If these effects occurred in early hominids, regular exposure could have contributed to the expansion and reorganization of the brain over generations. However, long-term evolutionary outcomes based on such findings remain purely hypothetical. The research is still in its infancy and has yet to establish clear links between acute psychedelic experiences and heritable cognitive changes. Supporters of the theory point to the convergence of multiple lines of evidence, archaeological, neurological, and anthropological, as a compelling case for further investigation. Yet, even they admit that the theory lacks the empirical rigor typically demanded by evolutionary biology. The absence of direct fossil or chemical evidence from early hominid sites makes the theory difficult to test by conventional means. What exists is a constellation of circumstantial clues, speculative associations, and intriguing patterns. Still, for many, the theory's appeal lies in its interdisciplinary nature. It brings together science, spirituality, and ancient tradition into a single narrative about human origins. Whether or not psilocybin was the catalyst for our cognitive revolution, the theory challenges the mainstream view that intelligence emerged solely through brute survival and natural selection. It invites a broader inquiry into the subtle, unseen forces that may have shaped the modern mind, forces that remain difficult to quantify, but impossible to ignore. While the Stoned Ape Theory has gained traction among psychedelic enthusiasts and some independent researchers, it has also faced considerable skepticism from the scientific community. Critics argue that the theory, while imaginative and thought-provoking, lacks the methodological foundation necessary for serious evolutionary hypotheses. The most prominent objection centers on the absence of direct evidence. As evolutionary biologist Steven Pinker once noted, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And for many in the academic world, McKenna's proposal simply doesn't meet that standard. One major point of contention is the rapidity of the evolution changes the theory seeks to explain. Brain expansion in early hominids did occur over a relatively short evolutionary timespan, but from a scientific perspective, this change can be attributed to a range of well-supported factors. Climatic shifts forced early humans into new environments where survival required more sophisticated tools, better memory, and enhanced social cooperation. These pressures likely selected for larger brains and better cognitive function. To introduce a psychoactive substance into this equation, some argue, adds unnecessary complexity to an already plausible explanation. Skeptics also point to the unpredictable effects of psychedelics. While psilocybin may promote creativity or empathy in some individuals, it can also cause confusion, fear, and hallucinations that are maladaptive in high-stress environments. In the wild, such altered states could leave individuals vulnerable to predators or environmental dangers. From an evolutionary standpoint, this raises questions about the viability of regular psilocybin use as a survival advantage. It's one thing to suggest that mushrooms may have influenced human culture or spirituality, but to claim they directly contributed to the structure of the human brain is, for many scientists, a bridge too far. Another criticism lies in the way the theory blurs the lines between metaphor and mechanism. Evolutionary biology relies on measurable, testable mechanisms: genetic mutation, selection pressure, inheritance. The Stoned Ape Theory operates in a different realm, often weaving together neurological data, speculative anthropology, and anecdotal reports from modern psychedelic users. For mainstream researchers, this interdisciplinary blending lacks the rigorous controls and replicability that science demands. Additionally, some anthropologists argue that the emphasis on psilocybin mushrooms ignores the broader landscape of early human diets and pharmacological experimentation. Early hominids may have ingested a wide variety of psychoactive plants, some beneficial, others toxic. It's difficult to isolate mushrooms as uniquely influential without broader comparative studies. Moreover, cultural evolution, the development of language, art, and religion, can occur without pharmacological catalysts. Many ancient societies developed complex mythologies and spiritual systems in the absence of known psychedelic use. Even within the field of psychedelic research, caution prevails. Scientists studying substances like psilocybin often emphasize their potential for therapeutic applications, treating depression, PTSD, and addiction, rather than their speculative role in shaping human evolution. While some researchers find McKenna's theory intriguing, few are willing to endorse it without more concrete evidence. It remains at best a thought experiment, fascinating, imaginative, and provocative, but far from proven. Still, the theory's endurance in the cultural imagination may reveal something important. While science seeks empirical truth, mythology serves a different function, offering symbolic meaning and narrative coherence in a chaotic world. In that sense, the Stoned Ape Theory exists at the crossroads of myth and science. It may not withstand the rigors of peer-reviewed analysis, but it continues to resonate with those seeking to understand not just how we became human, but why our minds reach beyond the material towards something transcendent. The implications of the Stoned Ape Theory stretch far beyond the boundaries of human evolution. Whether or not psilocybin mushrooms shape the anatomy of our brains, the deeper question lies in how altered states of consciousness have influenced our culture, morality, and collective identity. If the theory contains even a kernel of truth, it suggests that the human mind has always been shaped in part by its interactions with the natural pharmacology of the earth. That possibility forces a reevaluation of where consciousness ends and biology begins. For cultures that embrace altered states as sacred or meaningful, these substances are not merely tools for exploration, but keys to understanding the human condition. Shamans across continents have long described their psychedelic experiences as interactions with non-ordinary realities, visions of gods, ancestral spirits, or universal truths. In those societies, such experiences are woven into ethical systems, cosmologies, and rites of passage. The line between hallucination and revelation is not rigid, but porous. If our early ancestors experienced similar phenomena, whether triggered by psilocybin or other natural compounds, those experiences may have been foundational to the creation of belief systems, taboos, and the very structure of culture. Even language itself may bear the mark of altered consciousness. Some theorists speculate that metaphor, the ability to describe one thing in terms of another, may have arisen in part through visionary experience. Psychedelics, by disrupting ordinary perception, create a flood of symbolic associations and novel ideas. A mind flooded with fractals, archetypes, and surreal juxtapositions might begin to find poetic meaning in the world around it. The transition from grunts and gestures to abstract language may have required more than just a bigger brain. It may have required new ways of seeing. Art, too, may have roots in these early altered states. The earliest cave paintings, with their swirling patterns, animal-human hybrids, and mysterious symbols, suggest a deep psychological or spiritual intent. Some of these works have been interpreted as visual accounts of trance experiences. If these interpretations hold, then the origins of artistic expression are not merely decorative or documentary. They are visionary. They record the moment when the inner world first demanded a voice. This has ramifications for how we understand not just ancient humans, but ourselves. If consciousness has always included the capacity for transcendence, then modern humans who seek altered states through meditation, dreams, or psychedelics may not be deviants or outliers, but inheritors of an ancient legacy. The urge to explore inner space, to contact something beyond the visible, could be as fundamental as the drive to survive or reproduce. On a societal level, these implications challenge dominant narratives about reason and rationality. Western culture, shaped by Enlightenment values and scientific materialism, tends to dismiss non-ordinary states as pathological or recreational. But if these states were foundational to our development, then the rigid boundary between normal and altered may be an illusion. Perhaps the expansion of consciousness is not a deviation from the human story, but its central theme. In this light, the Stoned Ape Theory becomes more than an evolutionary hypothesis. It becomes a philosophical proposition that human beings are not just problem solvers or tool makers, but meaning seekers and mystics, shaped as much by vision and ecstasy as by logic and labor. Whether or not psilocybin was the trigger, the story it tells about human potential is one that continues to unfold in every generation. As the Stoned Ape Theory migrated from the fringe of academic speculation into mainstream cultural conversation, its impact began to ripple through media, art, and the broader societal understanding of human consciousness. While not formally adopted by any major scientific institution, the theory has become a touchstone in psychedelic literature, alternative history circles, and online communities searching for deeper meaning in human origins. Its rise has paralleled a broader re-examination of psychedelics themselves, not as recreational novelties or dangerous hallucinogens, but as powerful tools that may reveal lost or hidden dimensions of the human experience. In popular media, references to the theory have surfaced in unexpected places, from podcasts and documentaries to science fiction novels and music lyrics. Influential voices such as Joe Rogan, Graham Hancock, and Michael Pollan have all discussed the theory or its surrounding concepts, helping to bridge the gap between McKenna's original audiences and new generations raised in the age of information. This revival of interest has also coincided with a global psychedelic renaissance, with institutions like Johns Hopkins and Imperial College London conducting clinical trials on psilocybin for depression, PTSD, and addiction. The compound, once relegated to counterculture rebellion, is now being examined with scientific rigor. This shift in narrative has created space for theories like McKenna's to be discussed openly, not necessarily as fact, but as part of a legitimate cultural inquiry into the roots of consciousness. The theory taps into the growing recognition that ancient humans may have been far more sophisticated than previously believed, and that the strict materialist view of evolution may overlook crucial subjective elements of human development. In the age of digital media, where ancient texts, rare lectures, and anthropological studies can be accessed instantly, ideas that once circulated in underground bookshops now spread across global platforms. Meanwhile, portrayals of early humans in film and television have begun to change. Instead of brutish cavemen grunting their way through survival, newer representations sometimes depict them as intuitive beings with complex emotional lives, spiritual beliefs, and symbolic art. The concept of early hominids encountering psychedelics in the wild fits into this reimagined framework, offering a narrative that merges survival with transcendence. It humanizes our ancestors not just as biological entities, but as beings capable of awe, wonder, and mystical insight. Socially, the theory contributes to a growing discomfort with the idea that consciousness is simply a byproduct of neural activity. In a world increasingly dominated by AI, machine learning, and algorithmic behavior, many people are drawn to explanations of consciousness that emphasize mystery, depth, and the ineffable. The Stoned Ape Theory, whether taken literally or metaphorically, offers an origin story that positions the mind as more than a mechanical outcome. It invites a view of humanity rooted in sacred ecology, where intelligence and spirituality evolve together in direct relationship with the natural world. This resurgence of interest has also challenged long-standing narratives about the so-called primitive mind. Where older models dismissed indigenous knowledge systems as superstition, new approaches are beginning to recognize the depth and complexity of shamanic cosmologies. For many native cultures, the plants that induce altered states are not simply chemicals, but teachers, agents of wisdom that guide healing and insight. By suggesting that such relationships may have been present at the dawn of human consciousness, the theory repositions indigenous traditions not as outdated relics, but as sophisticated frameworks that preserve fragments of our evolutionary memory. In this cultural moment, the Stoned Ape Theory serves as a prism through which multiple societal shifts converge, rethinking consciousness, revaluing ancient knowledge, and reimagining what it means to be human. Whether embraced as a literal account or symbolic allegory, it continues to shape the conversation around humanity's past, present, and potential futures. As the Stoned Ape Theory evolved within public consciousness, it began attracting even more speculative and fringe interpretations, extensions of the core idea that pushed it beyond the domain of evolutionary biology and into more metaphysical or esoteric territory. These offshoots didn't just ask whether psilocybin mushrooms played a role in our cognitive development. They proposed that our interactions with these substances might have opened doorways to other dimensions, established contact with non-human intelligences, or even redirected the course of human evolution in ways we still don't fully understand. One such idea posits that psilocybin is not just a neurochemical compound with hallucinogenic effects, but a form of biological technology, an intelligence embedded in the natural world with a specific purpose. Some proponents suggest that the spores of psilocybin mushrooms are among the most resilient known to science, capable of surviving the vacuum of space and extreme radiation. From this observation, they propose that mushrooms may be extraterrestrial in origin, sent across the cosmos as a seeding mechanism, not for plant life, but for consciousness itself. This notion, often referred to as the panspermia mycology hypothesis, proposes that intelligent life, or the capacity for it, could be distributed through fungal spores across planetary systems. Under this view, early hominids didn't just stumble upon mushrooms as food or medicine. They were unwitting participants in a far older, far stranger process of cosmic communication. Psilocybin then becomes more than a molecule. It becomes a kind of encoded language, one that activates latent potentials within the human brain and connects us to a broader, possibly non-terrestrial intelligence. Other interpretations draw parallels between modern psychedelic experiences and ancient religious narratives. For example, the biblical story of the Tree of Knowledge has been re-examined by some theorists who argue that the forbidden fruit was in fact a metaphor for psychoactive mushrooms. In this reading, humanity's fall from innocence was not a moral transgression, but the moment of awakening. When consciousness expanded, self-awareness emerged, and the human species stepped into a new dimension of reality. Similar motifs appear in the mythologies of Mesoamerican, Hindu, and Siberian cultures, where divine knowledge is often transmitted through visionary plants or celestial encounters. Some even suggest that the rapid development of spiritual systems, gods, heavens, hells, afterlives, may not have emerged from abstract fear or imagination, but from direct experiences with altered states. Entities encountered during high-dose psilocybin sessions are frequently described in consistent terms: powerful, intelligent, sometimes benevolent, sometimes terrifying. The similarities between these encounters and ancient depictions of gods, angels, demons, or spirit guides have led some researchers to question whether religious archetypes are cultural inventions or glimpses into deeper layers of consciousness that psychedelics temporarily reveal. A more radical extension of the theory considers the idea that the development of consciousness itself may not have been entirely organic. If psilocybin did introduce new cognitive patterns, and if those patterns were nudged or guided by external intelligence, whether terrestrial, extraterrestrial, or transdimensional, then human evolution may have involved a degree of conscious intervention. This view aligns with broader ancient astronaut theories, which claim that non-human forces have played a recurring role in shaping the trajectory of human development, often through subtle manipulation rather than overt contact. While mainstream science generally regards these theories as speculative fiction, they continue to thrive in online forums, documentaries, and visionary art. Their appeal lies not just in their mystery, but in their ability to reframe the human story as something more enchanted, more interconnected with the cosmos. In these speculative frameworks, the mushroom is not simply a plant. It is a messenger, a gateway, and perhaps even a co-creator of the human mind. Whether fact or allegory, these ideas expand the narrative beyond biology, suggesting that our origins and our destiny may be more complex than we've been led to believe. In the end, the Stoned Ape Theory remains one of the most provocative and polarizing ideas ever introduced into the conversation about human origins. It challenges the boundaries of science, spirituality, and imagination, proposing that the spark of modern consciousness may not have come from a gradual climb through tools, fire, and language alone, but through a chance encounter with a psychoactive organism growing in the dung of grazing animals. Whether seen as a literal evolutionary mechanism or a powerful metaphor for the expansion of awareness, the theory continues to captivate those seeking deeper meaning in the human story. It is a theory that thrives in the space between disciplines, between biology and mythology, chemistry and consciousness. While lacking the kind of empirical support required for scientific consensus, its value may lie elsewhere. It dares to suggest that the mind is not merely a byproduct of material evolution, but a phenomenon shaped by experiences that transcend ordinary perception. It reimagines early humans not as isolated problem solvers locked in a brutal struggle for survival, but as sensitive, intuitive beings, exploring their inner worlds just as urgently as their outer ones. The cultural resilience of the theory speaks to a broader desire to reconnect with something lost. In modern societies dominated by digital overstimulation, environmental alienation, and materialist reductionism, the notion that consciousness could be enriched, perhaps even awakened, through contact with natural compounds resonates deeply. Psychedelics, once demonized and banned, are now being re-examined with fresh eyes. In clinical trials and underground ceremonies, people report experiences of unity, insight, and profound transformation. Echoes, perhaps, of the same visions that shaped early mythologies and social cohesion among ancient tribes. But even beyond its implications for history and science, the Stoned Ape Theory offers something else, a story of humility. It suggests that the key to our evolution may not have been fire, tools, or warfare, but communion with the earth itself. It proposes that the leap toward consciousness, creativity, and self-awareness may have come not from domination of nature, but from a mysterious partnership with it. That intelligence could have bloomed not in laboratories or forges, but in grassy plains where early humans, curious and hungry, found a strange mushroom and dared to taste it. It's a vision that challenges the anthropocentric narrative of supremacy and control. If true, it would mean that the most human parts of us, our capacity for love, for language, for transcendence, were born not from struggle alone, but from surrender to mystery. That our story is not one of isolation atop the evolutionary ladder, but of entanglement with forces older and wiser than ourselves. Whether regarded as science, speculation, or myth, the Stoned Ape Theory leaves a lasting impression. It asks us to consider a possibility both simple and profound, that the evolution of our minds may have depended in part on the wisdom of the natural world, and that the path forward, like the path behind us, might still be written in the patterns of spores and stars, dreams and dirt, silence and vision. Thanks for listening. This has been another episode of Conspiracy Files. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to follow us wherever you get your podcasts. And if you'd like to support the show and unlock bonus content, subscribe to the Forbidden Knowledge Network on Patreon. Subscribe now.